Welcome to the Macias Show. This is the episode where I discuss some of the giving decisions that Misha and I are making at the end of the year as we all think about the things we're investing in. This is the end of the year giving episode. We have a cool episode coming for you next week, which I will preview for you on Monday. But I wanted to start out by overviewing some of the giving that Misha and I are making here at the end of the year. For your consideration, I do want to make sure that this month is a time for us to all think about being generous during this Advent season of anticipating not only the coming of Christ that's celebrated in his incarnation, but his ultimate promised return. Let's get to the show. Moth and rust will destroy everything. And this is something that I have to remind myself of often because I like putting money into an IRA and I like thinking about how to make my money work for itself. And I like to think about how to make sure that Misha and I are being wise stewards of our resources so that we can leave our children a legacy and help people financially. But this is the episode. I usually do this. I don't know if I do this every year. I'm pretty sure I do it every year. Is that in December, I do an end of the year giving to kind of overview some of the last minute gifts we are doing. Now, hopefully you're doing your giving throughout the year, but some people do wait towards the end of the year to make more substantive gifts. And so, and I will also say this. Some of you don't think that your $100 or $250 is substantive, but being close to a lot of political organizations and nonprofits and churches, I can just tell you that each and every one of those gifts that come in make a difference when it comes to what you're able to do at the end of the year, the planning that you're making going into next year. So this episode is not reserved for those of substantial means. This episode is designed for us to all be thinking about how we are generous. And that's really what we should be asking ourselves. How do we look at what we've been given? Do we consider other people's needs, or do we tend to be self-centered? And I think we could all admit that we tend to be more self-centered in the way we think about what we've made, the money we have. I'm going to start my list with my church. In fact, my wife and I are directing a significantly larger amount than we normally do at our end of the year giving toward our church, and that's Trinity San Antonio. It's a Lutheran church plant here in the city. Many of you at this point have heard me talk about it before, but we joined 5 years ago when there were 20 people in the middle of COVID trying to start this church, and felt over time that the Lord really called us to plant with them, to dig our roots deeply with this church. And now this church has got about 100 people at it. So going from about 25 years ago to 100 individuals. And we officially separated from our sending church 2 years ago and planted formed our own church. And then we called our planting pastor to serve. And that was 2 years ago, this last October. So 2 years and a couple months ago, I guess, at this point. But we are directing more of our giving towards that church as we've been involved in understanding the budget and the needs that people have. I will say this too, before we even talk about institutional giving, you should reach out to your pastor this week. If you don't know your pastor personally, then I think you should seek to be at a church where you know your pastor personally. But if you do know your pastor personally, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to him this week and just say, I wanted to know if there are certain families in the church that are having financial struggles towards the end of the year. I promise you there are. I promise you there are. And you have an opportunity to look at helping meet some of those needs. And I can just tell you, being intricately involved in our church, there are families that have needs, and there are individuals in the church who get to come alongside and help, whether with direct financial support or HEB gift cards for a couple weeks, or an Amazon gift card so that they can just for Christmas gifts. Think about that. Think about a couple families in your church that are struggling financially, and what a gift it would be to get a $250 Amazon gift card that they could then buy Christmas gifts for the family off of, instead of taking that out of a pot of money that they might not actually have right now. So reach out to your pastor. But the truth is that my list of end of the year gifts is shorter this year just because we are more aware of the specific needs of our church, and so we're directing more of our end of the year giving towards that. Young churches are always in need of financial support, and we have a dear friend of mine who they came to church about a year after we showed up, and he has had a very successful career in the tech industry, but felt like the Lord was calling him into seminary. And so he will be graduating seminary this coming May, and he'll be going off into a seminary internship. Our church is a planting church. We've already hosted a pastor who was with us for a year and then went and planted another church in Iowa. And we have another pastor seminary intern showing up in June to then train up for a year and then send out, hopefully, Lord willing, to plant another church. And all of these things start to cost amounts of money. You have to pay somebody for their time. And so as we looked at all of that and see what the Lord's doing in our midst, we decided, hey, we're going to push substantially more resources when it comes to just our end of the year giving towards the work that's happening in our local church. So one, I want to encourage you to give to your local church. Please do that before the end of the year. Reach out to your pastor. There may be specific financial needs that some people have in your church that you can give toward. And then if you want to also help a church that is a young, growing church plant that has having impact on the kingdom, then after those two things, you could consider going to trinitysa.org, which is my church's website, and donating. You could be a monthly donor there. You can give towards specific needs, or you can just donate to the general fund. But the point is that we should all be about investing in the work that's being done in the kingdom of God. So I want to start this giving episode with that reminder. A couple other organizations that I'm giving to at the end of the year. One would be Texans for Vaccine Choice. And this is no surprise to y'all because you're aware. My wife and I have been supporters of Texans for Vaccine Choice for some time. I can just tell you that I was there when this organization started, meeting with a couple women who were just passionate about making sure that the government didn't come in and start dictating to parents exactly how they could take care of their children. And watching them mature and grow has just been such a blessing and encouragement. It was a couple hundred women across the state that started organizing. And today that entity has well over 100,000 active members. And I can just tell you, there's a lot of organizations out there that have quote unquote membership, but Texans for Vaccine Choice has well over 100,000 people. And these people are really, really engaged in the work that they're doing. They're actively participating in the legislative process. They're actively engaging in their community. They're contacting their local officials. They're establishing relationships with the political process, and they're making a difference. And this last legislative session, we were finally able to accomplish quite a few policies that they'd been working on for quite some time to get across the finish line. There are two big things that they're doing, which is why I just continue to invest in their work. And these are probably not the two final things they'll get to do, but two big problems we have is that one, you cannot go to a medical school in Texas without having received every single vaccine that Anthony Fauci thinks you should receive. That's insane. And some of the medical schools are getting around it by saying, well, you can be admitted to our medical school, but where you take your clinicals, which you need to graduate, they have all the vaccine mandates. So you can get admitted, but there is no path for you to graduate a medical school in Texas without getting every single vaccine that Anthony Fauci thinks you should get. That's a problem. And then guess what? We do protect many workers from having vaccine mandates, except for medical workers. So here's the funny thing. If you want to know why it's really hard to find a doctor that will actually believe in your decision of your children's health care, it's because they themselves live in a mandated industry. And if you want to know why, when you're at the hospital, people are antagonizing you if you decide to not fully vaccinate your child, it's because all of them have to be fully vaccinated or they'll be fired. And anybody who would have thought for themselves and done a little bit more research gets fired. So it makes sense why parents are being accosted like they are. These are two major policies that I think we need to work on. And Texans for Vaccine Choice is the one working on them. There have been other people involved in this movement, but a lot of them will often just nip around the edges and try to get like one little COVID vaccine exemption, not actually addressing the medical freedom issues that are there. So Texans for Vaccine Choice is one of the entities that Misha and I are giving to at the end of the year. And getting into this kind of parental involvement and parental rights issue, there is the Family Freedom Project. Now, the Family Freedom Project is actually a project of the Texas Homeschool Coalition, but it doesn't have to do with homeschooling. Now, there are homeschool families that get involved, but it is not a homeschooling specific project. The Family Freedom Project has been on the front lines of defending families who are wrongfully accused of child abuse. Defending families who are wrongfully accused of child abuse in Texas. And I can tell you, as somebody who has become familiar, someone who's become familiar with all of the intricate details in some of these cases, it's pretty horrific. You have stories of families who are caring for their children and have a false report made, and the assumption is made of guilt on the parents' part, and the children are removed. We had a family who had an investigation going on where no abuse had even been found. They had another baby, and the second that baby was born, CPS just came and took that baby because they said, well, we think you might have abused this kid, which we have no evidence for, and we don't have anything to really prove that at all. But just until you prove to us your innocence with this one, we're taking this baby that was born. And there are multiple cases going on at all times where the Family Freedom Project are the ones on the front lines. And here's the thing. Most families who have their children taken away do not have the financial resources to retain the attorneys necessary to defend themselves. It's just not the case. Many of these people need support. So the Family Freedom Project provides the lawyers, provides the strategy and the understanding, and then they take that experience and go into the legislature and help change the Child Protective Services laws, the Department of Family Protective Services, DFPS. They go in and reform the child welfare system. Within child welfare reform, it's important to remember that we need more resources spent on taking kids away from parents who are sexually transitioning them, okay? So imagine you have this entire state agency, and if you're mutilating your kids' genitals, we don't care. We're not doing anything about it. Sounds great. We're staying out of your way. Go fight, win. But if somebody at a hospital thinks one thing and doesn't ask follow-up questions, or one family member's ticked off and calls an anonymous tip, you are guilty until proven innocent and your children are removed from your home. There are some children we have to remove from homes because they're being abused. We have some really insane leftist parents who are abusing their children substantially. But here's the thing to remember. If the child hasn't been abused and CPS takes them from their parents, they have now been abused. If the child wasn't traumatized because they weren't neglected or abused by their parents, but then Child Protective Services comes and rips them away from their home, they've now been traumatized. They've now been abused. And the state is the abuser in that situation. And there are no negative ramifications for CPS when they abuse children. When we conclude the case and realize there was no neglect, there was no abuse, this child's being returned to the home after being in CPS custody for sometimes over a year. At that moment in time, the state is the abuser. If the Family Freedom Project isn't there, there's no accountability to this system. So I can just tell you that that's one reason why we are making a end of the year donation to the Family Freedom Project. That's familyfreedomproject.org, familyfreedomproject.org, that you can go. And Texans for Vaccine Choice is just texansforvaccinechoice.com. texansforvaccinechoice.com.
Are you worried about your kid's future? You should be. I'm Charles Blaine with Texas Tomorrow. This is a show where we're going to talk about the issues and the people that are pushing the policies that concern your family, your home, and your kids. Catch Texas Tomorrow every Thursday.
Lastly, and I've talked on this show about, I did the good, the bad, and the ugly of the legislative session. Y'all remember that. So the good was all these conservative policies that passed, which is great. The bad, if you recall, was the fact that we fell short on property tax relief. We didn't provide substantial property tax relief. And really, from a fiscally conservative perspective, nobody in state government was focused on reining in the size of government. We had massive record spending while at the same time taking this big surplus we had and using it to grow a lot more government permanently in many ways, as opposed to provide meaningful, long-lasting relief. And property tax relief will be a big discussion this year as we go into 2026, I guess next year specifically. I think that's really important. And just fiscal sanity in general. Are we funding woke and weaponized government? That's another question. We've had this with our universities, where you have Texas A&M literally saying, we want to groom our students into these radical DEI LGBT advocates so they can be future superintendents. And that president was eventually fired with a ton of pressure and then given millions and millions of dollars in his payout. So that's why Misha and I are also donating to Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. Texans for Fiscal Responsibility is probably one of the oldest, longstanding conservative advocacy organizations in the state. They originally started because Rick Perry had this grand idea to start a business franchise tax. And he said he was going to get rid of property taxes, or at least cut down on property taxes a lot with this business franchise tax. And it did not work. And Texans for Fiscal Responsibility told the people of Texas it was not going to work, and it didn't work. And from that point on, they have grown into an entity that is greatly involved, is reading thousands of pieces of legislation, is sending recommendations to lawmakers so they and their staff know what kind of policy grows government or shrinks government in any way. Not only the role and responsibility, but then also the crony capitalism that's always trying to prey on our society. I've talked about this with casinos. Texans for Fiscal Responsibility is probably the premier organization that's in opposition to expanded casino gaming and sports betting. A handful of people that are trying to spend tens of millions of dollars so that they themselves, with this small little cohort of people, can get the exclusive license to financially pillage a society. I've said that before. I will continue saying it. I'm going to say it all next year. Even the sports betting stuff, which is horrendous. They're like, oh yeah, it has to be an app-based transaction and this and this. And you're like, oh, okay, so it's just these 3 apps. Yeah, the 3 of us that are paying the lobbyists to write the laws are making sure that the law, when written, makes it to where only us 3 can financially destroy these families and profit off of it. That's the plan. Texans for Fiscal Responsibility is not just focused on property tax reform, not just focused on local indebtedness problems and property tax relief and lowering and eliminating property taxes over time. They're focused on woke and weaponized government at the university level. They're focused on addressing these problems with crony capitalist deals or expanded gambling. So that is a reason I think that these are issues that are not only not going away, but they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. There are a lot of other organizations that Misha and I support. So I always hate doing this episode sometimes because I think of like all the different organizations that we might give a donation to or support their work throughout the year. And then we don't make an end of the year donation and then I don't talk about them on the show. But yes, there are a ton of great organizations. Specifically, those are the 4 that we are making end of the year donations to. And I would encourage you to. Now, other organizations that we're very supportive of include Texas Gun Rights, which I'm not only a big fan of, but I think they've done an excellent job actually moving things in the right direction. The reality is that they got, I want to say last session, they got like 1 or 2 of their priority bills done. But in 2025, they got 6 of their 8 legislative priorities done. And it took Texas Gun Rights being very, very active in the process to make sure that all the pressure was put, and they worked very in hand with pro-gun lawmakers to get those victories across the finish line. Texas Gun Rights is a great organization. True Texas Project is doing a great job organizing grassroots conservatives across the state. Protecting Texas Children and Texas Values are 2 great organizations that are actively engaged in the culture war. And y'all hear me talk about this all the time. So if there's one issue I probably talk about more than anything else, it's the sexualization of Texas children. And I can just tell you that I saw the work that Texas Values was doing. I saw the work that Vanessa Sivich at Protecting Texas Children did day in and day out in the Capitol to make sure that policy that was passed as strong as possible. The policy that was being killed, the pressure was put on actually getting that across the finish line. These are things we can't take for granted, but if organizations like this aren't around and engaged in Texas, then the left will continue to sexualize our kids. That's what they're focused on. They have to do it. It's a strange battle that we're engaged in, but we have a force, it's dark, and its motivation is to cause sex to come to the front of the brain for children in Texas. They want to take something that children normally don't think about and get them to think about it. As an adult, sometimes you'll look back on your childhood and you'll remember these things that you didn't even know what was going on at the time. That's called innocence. That's what that is. You'll go, I don't know, I remember this show and then this lady said something in the show and mom changed the channel. And you were 6 years old. And I don't know, maybe I'm the only one who has these flashbacks, but I think about it and go, oh, that's what that was. Or like I remember watching this movie that I had also watched at 8, and Sandra Bullock says something, and I remembered when that scene showed up in my 20s, my dad changing the channel when she said that thing when I was 10, right? This is how it's supposed to be. A society introduces the realities of what sex is to children in appropriate ways, which means the people introducing this to them are their parents at certain levels, giving them different amounts of information as they become different ages. They should not know what's being said. They should not quite know what's going on. That's a good thing. And we have forces in our state and society that want to force those kids to think about sex as early as possible. And so Protecting Texas Children is there, engaging on all these policies These are just a couple organizations that we support throughout the year. And specifically, I told you all the ones that we're giving a little extra to. I like doing monthly support for some organizations, signing up for $10 a month or $25 a month or whatever your family can afford. Some people can do $100 a month. Some people can do $500 a month. Some people can do $1,000 a month. And I know patriotic Texans who have, in the last 30 days, committed to different conservative causes or their church or whatever. Hey, we're going to give $1,000 a month. We're going to give $500 a month. We're going to give at that level. And that changes the way people can strategically think about all the battles they're engaging in. There's a ton of what we call grifters out there. One of the reasons I do this episode is because there's a ton of entities and organizations that raise a ton of money and spend a ton of money, and you don't know what they're spending it on. And in fact, if you go research what they're spending it on, you'll be disheartened that you gave a lot of money to them. And so I like to go through this to let y'all know that I can assure you that these type of organizations are ones that are fighting to make Texas a better place and are doing so in a very responsible, prudential way with any funds that you decide to give them between now and the end of the year. May God bless you, and may God bless the great state of Texas.
Texas Scorecard is the place to learn about Texas politics. Be sure to click the bell, like this video, and subscribe if you believe in citizen-driven journalism. You can also go to texasscorecard.com to read all things about Texas. Texas Scorecard, real news for real Texans.